Hey gang, welcome back to another video here at Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video will be on this 2006 Mitsubishi Raider, which is really just a variation of the Dodge Dakota. Now, the problem with this vehicle is it's making a lot of noise up front. The front suspension squeaks, which isn't uncommon because the bushings will fail or get weak or dry or whatever and make a lot of noise, but it also has issues when you turn the wheel left and right. Now this truck belongs to some friends of mine. They took it to a repair shop and they were quoted $1,100 to replace the ball joints. They asked me if I could help out. I said sure, I'll take a look at it. Now the issue can very well be that the ball joints dry out and become noisy. And as I said, the bushings can dry out and make noise as well. The repair is to replace the lower ball joint itself and then replace the whole upper control arm. I've done a little research on it. I've tried to find just the ball joint, but as it turns out, it's easier to just replace the upper control arm. It's even more cost effective, let's say. So that's what I'm going to do today. Now to start this process, I'm going to have to jack the truck up, get it on jack stands, get the wheels off, and then start taking things apart. So I'll get into that process and show you how I'm going to do it. So I've never had so much trouble getting wheels off of a vehicle, but as you can see, they're off. Now as I'm assessing this, I also notice the brake pads are shot. So I'm going to be replacing the brake pads as well. And I'll also take a look at these rotors and see if they need to be changed. So the process is I'm going to pull off the caliper, get it out of the way. I think I'll leave this bracket on for now unless I decide that the rotors need to be changed, and if so, I'll remove that bracket. But ideally I want to get to the ball joints. So you have the upper ball joint and the lower ball joint. The upper one is just held on with a nut. The lower one is also held on with a nut, but it has a cotter key that locks it in place, so it's a castellated nut. Now, this repair, I have the lower ball joints, which are pressed in, and the upper ones are actually on these arms. So I don't even know if you can buy these separate, as a separate piece, but for the cost, it was cheaper just to buy this whole control arm. And these are from Rock Auto. Now they're going to have different levels of parts you can buy. They'll have the very cheap stuff, intermediate, and then kind of the OE replacement style. That's what I bought, the OE replacement stuff. And I don't know if these were, I don't even remember what the price was right now, but believe me, it was relatively cheap. So the upper control arm has two bolts that hold it in place. So I'll have to get those two out up above, and I'll show you that when I get to it, and swap this arm out. So that shouldn't be too bad. I do note that this one is castellated. It has a castellated nut. The original one does not. So I'll set that aside. The lower ball joint has a snap ring as well. So not only does it press into the lower control arm, but there's a retaining snap ring that helps hold it in place. And along with the kit, it comes with a snap ring, a cotter pin, a zerk fitting, and a washer. So all that will go together, and I'll show you that when I get to that point. Also, what you will need is a ball joint removal kit. This is number 46, as you can see, kit number 46. This is from Advanced Auto Parts, but all parts stores should have these. And the part number is 648617. Now this kit, you'll have to put a deposit on it. In this case, it was like 250 bucks just for the deposit, but you take the tool back, you get your money back. Now, as I said, the first thing I want to do is remove this caliper. The caliper is held in with 13mm bolts. You go on the back side And I don't like to use my hands to break bolts loose. I use a mallet. And you probably can't see, but the shaft that this bolt goes into is turning. So to fix that, take a secondary wrench, which in this case is a 17, and use it to hold the shaft from turning. Do the same thing to the bottom bolt. It appears somebody, maybe the factory, I don't know, had put Loctite on these. Make a note of that. I can tell this truck isn't from Georgia. So there's one. Wow. Look at how much of that pad is gone. Just falling apart because the pad itself is rusting, or the main part is rusting. So that was the inboard one. Man. Yeah. Nothing left. So as you can see, the ball joint has a cotter pin in it. I also want to point out I have a jack underneath the control arm. It's not touching it, it's just close to it. So I'm going to work on getting this cotter pin out of the way. Aha! This bottom nut is a 7/8. So see if we can't break that loose. I'm going to take 2 wrenches and connect them together. Basically the open end, and then take a box end from another wrench, lock it on, and that increases my leverage. So we'll see if... Aha! I'm going to leave that nut on the shaft. I want to separate that. This could take some effort. To do this, I'm going to use a pickle fork. This is part of a kit that comes with different forks that you can interchange. They thread on. And this one I've already checked. It is wider than the post on the new ball joint. May or may not work. There we go. Ah, that's a good sound. Great. Now I want to get the upper one loose. Now this nut is a 13/16. So again, I'll put the wrench on, and I will double up the wrenches themselves, like I said. Good. So now I want to separate that ball joint, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use the pickle fork. This one fits over the shaft on this new one, so I know that'll clear. So I want to change out the head, or the fork itself. And obviously safety glasses and hearing protection are a must. And like I said, I left the nut on the end of the shaft here. Nice. That popped loose. So now what I want to do is take the jack and jack up the lower control arm just a little bit. Now we have a little bit of play in all of this, which is good. Yep, the shaft wants to turn. There we go. Excellent. All right, that's taken loose. I think to make this a little easier, I'm going to separate the tie rod end from the spindle assembly. This is a 21 millimeter. Now this may not come loose easily. I had hoped that I could use a tie rod separating tool or ball joint separating tool that I have here, but it's not tall enough. So I'm going to have to do another method, and this works. I don't want to take the pickle fork and wedge in here and destroy the boot on the arm or on the tie rod. So that works. Doesn't damage it, and the shock of hitting it is what lets it come loose. Now, to get the heavy part out of the way. See that? These ball joints are shot. You should not be able to do that at all. So I'm just going to use a regular pair of needle nose pliers to put in the holes of the snap ring. Spread it apart and slip it off. I also want to remove that Zerk fitting. Now, I'm not saving this, so, and it didn't hurt it anyway, it just breaks loose. Set that aside. It won't hurt to put some of your favorite penetrating fluid around this to try to let it soak in a little bit. Okay, so this is what you see when you open the kit. Various adapters and different things, and there's an instruction book up in the top there that'll show you how to use this. For me, I need to have a receiver that'll go around the ball joint itself. Of course, we'll need the big clamping device, the threaded shaft that goes into that, and essentially assemble this over top of the ball joint and then press it out. Now at this point, take the lower boot off. You want to make sure that the receiving collar doesn't hit the ball joint itself. It has to go around it. So I'll try to get this assembled. Again, put the cup under. And also the cup has a receiving flange in it, so it'll fit and center itself over the big hole in the bottom of the clamp. The reason it's open like this is so that you can direct the shaft from the ball joint through that hole. So you get that in place. You can let this rotate and hit the lower control arm, so you don't have to fight with it. Let's give it a go. Great. And as I was showing you, this thing is worn out. And this only has 136,000 miles on it. So at this point, I'm going to clean up the lower control arm a little bit. So I'm going to use some brake parts cleaner and a paper towel and just spray that down. Make sure there's no interfering junk for it to go back together. You could even take a wire brush and clean it up a little bit. Now we want to press the ball joint back in place. I'll point out that the ball joint has these little grooves pressed into them, and that is just to help keep it from rotating and also to keep it in place up in the control arm somewhat. Now this is a press fit, it's a tolerance fit, so you might be able to get those to line up slightly, but it's not going to matter much. What you'll need is the lower cup, and it has to fit around the ball joint. You don't want it to hit the boot, so it just has to hit the flange. And this post, of course, that gives the post somewhere to go when it gets into the tool itself. Alright, so now we want to press it up. So we'll need a receiver, and that's what this cup is. This cup is slightly bigger than the ball joint, so as it goes up it won't interfere with it pressing up. The only thing you might do is look at taking out the little bolt that is just a cap for where the Zerk fitting goes. I'm going to leave that in place for now, get it started, and then maybe I'll take that out to finish pressing it in. I'm going to start with the wrench, just to get it moving. That looks like it did a fine job. Didn't even make contact with that bolt. Now I need to get the snap ring on. And the Zerk fitting. Now this, you want to be careful. You don't want to get crazy putting it in, and you also want to put it at an angle that it doesn't limit your access for actually pumping grease into it. 5/16. Well, I don't want to mess it up. So there, it's aimed forward where I can get to it with a grease fitting. But that's it. I mean, that takes care of the bottom ball joint. Alright, moving forward, I want to point out something, and I should have shown this earlier. I took the caliper and wrapped a zip tie around it so it would be supported by the upper control arm, and it was out of the way, and just an easy way to do that. And you know, you can undo zip ties with a simple screwdriver. So recycle, reuse, right? I'm going to put this down below on the lower control arm. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to just hang it on the sway bar so it'll sit on that post. Hose isn't kinked. Alright, for the next section of this process, or next part of this process, is I want to remove the upper control arm. Now what I see and I want to point out is these are bolts, and there's a nut that has a retaining type of flange on the welded to the nut itself, and I can show you that once I get it apart. The reason for that is whenever you're tightening, you know, when they were on the assembly line, this would have just been held in place until the bolt got started, and then it rotated and locked against part of the frame. So we're going to keep that there, but I need to get the bolts loose. So these are 18 millimeter, and again I'm going to interlock a wrench into the first wrench and use that for leverage. You could also use a breaker bar, socket, whatever you have available. And now you can see, maybe see, I don't know, that little flange that's welded to the bolt or to the nut is rotating around. And I'm going to let it go all the way around until it hits the frame again. And then it'll break loose even easier. I will make sure that there's nothing behind that, no kind of hoses or wiring or anything, and there's not. Okay, so that was easy enough to break loose using that. So now I'm just going to use a 3/8 drive, ratchet, and socket. So here's the bolt, and here is that nut with the flange welded to it that I was talking about. So I want to make sure those don't get lost. And now I'm going to break loose the rear one. Same thing, interlock the wrenches. This may take a little more effort. And that flange will turn around just like the other one did. And then that's all it takes to remove the upper control arm. And I'll point out there's a lot of play in this ball joint as well. Okay, now we're just going to reverse the process. So, put the control arm in place, put in the bolts, now at this point I could tell you some sort of torque, but I would prefer you look up the torque specs yourselves, because I'm just going to make these tight. I know how tight they were with the wrench. I'm going to replicate that when I tighten them back down. But if you want to know the torque, look it up, find it, and that way you're comfortable with the numbers you get. I have had cases where I've shown or shared torque specs, and there's other times that I haven't, and I've had complaints both ways, honestly. So some people would say don't trust anybody who doesn't know how to look up torque, but the other thing is I could just tell you a number. I could just tell you any number, and you have to believe that if you want. So look it up. Make sure you know and you're comfortable with how you want to do it. All right, this is gonna rotate around against the frame. So as I snug this down, I will pay attention to how the nut is in relation to the frame itself. I don't want it to be at an angle or anything. So get a little bit of tension on that. And then I want to lift this up because I'm going to have it up some just to get the spindle back in. So if it holds, fine. I may even leave those a little bit loose at this point. Probably a good idea. That way if I do need to move this, I can do it and then confirm they're tight later. Yeah, that's a good idea. I can, while I'm here though, put in the Zerk fitting. So deep within the bag, get this Zerk fitting out. And I believe that one has a smaller diameter by the looks of it. And also it comes with a cotter pin. When in doubt, get your 1/4 inch drive out socket set out and find the one that fits. The winner is 7mm. So whoever had 7mm, you want a cookie. Now for the fun part, trying to put this back together. So this is pretty heavy. You may need some help. The upper nut. There we go. Aha. Whew. The lower has a washer in with it, so I'm going to put that on now that I have some of the weight suspended by the upper. So I don't know why there would be a washer, except the nut that was on the bottom has a wide flange on it. The nut they provide you with is just a simple castellated nut, and there is a height difference. So you can either use the original or you can use the one they provide you with, and that's what I'm going to put on. The upper one is 13/16, and the lower one, wow, it's bigger than 7/8. The one that came off is 7/8. So I'll try 15/16, and that's what size fits. For anybody keeping score. So also at this point I will connect the sway bar. Just slides in just like it came out. I know I don't have the video on it, but original nut. Put that in place. And now I'm going to secure everything. So make sure everything's tight. And again, if you want a torque spec, I suggest you look it up. But the thing is with these, the ball joint itself, the post is tapered. Okay? The hole that it goes into is tapered. So it's more critical that it just gets in that taper and drawn down nice and tight, rather than have like a standard torque like on a regular bolt. So what I want to do is line up the castellated nut with one of the holes going through the shaft so I can get the cotter pin in. Get that in, bend it around. So it's bent around the post. And now make sure the bottom one is tight, and also put a cotter pin in it. Now at this point, I have all the bolts tight. I went back and secured the upper control arm. I noted the bolt or the nuts are tight for the ball joints, and I put the cotter pins in. I also resecured the tie rod, or the tie rod end, I should say. Now what I want to do is service the grease fittings that are on the ball joints. I want to make sure they have grease in them before I do anything else. And what will happen is it'll fill the rubber boot down below. Now I see it. Okay. So that one's serviced. I'll do the same to the bottom one. Make sure it's full. And then what I would normally say is to reinstall your brake pads, put the caliper back on, just like I showed it coming apart. Put the bolts in, the 14, I believe they're, or 13 millimeter, regardless, the bolts. Put those back in the caliper, and you're done. Now I'm going to leave this apart because I need to talk with the owners about whether they want me to replace these rotors. So that's not going to be part of this video, and that's going to be it for changing out the ball joints for this 2006 Mitsubishi Raider / Dodge Durango. That's going to be the end of this video. I hope you found some useful information so you can work on your own project and save yourself some money in the process. Now, I did not assemble the caliper. I am going to talk to the owner about whether they want me to continue on and take care of the rotors and everything at the same time. And if so, I will do a follow-up video doing the brakes on this same vehicle. Beyond that, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you're a new subscriber or new viewer to the channel, I ask that you subscribe, hit that bell notification button so that you can see more videos like this in the future. And if you're interested, I have a ton of videos on Mustangs and Camaros and different things like that. You can go check out the playlist, and maybe you'll enjoy some of those as well. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. Hey gang, today's video will be about replacing the lower ball joints in this Mitsubishi, hey gang, which is really just a variation of the Dodge Durango. Hey gang, today's video will be on this 2006 Mitsubishi Raider, which is really just a version of the Dodge Durango. No, it's not. No, it's the Dakota. It's the Dakota. I've discovered something. The wrench slides on the lower part, but it doesn't go over the top. I'm going to clean that up so I can use my impact. Now, 7/8 fits. The grease fittings are on the bearings. No. Can I get this right? Stop it.